I am Colby Sumner, and this is America, Fog of War.
Pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of...
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
I can hear you! I can hear you! The rest of the world hears you! If the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of it.
We're told that on his body was found a diary. Under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again for another Hip Pocket History. I'm Colby Sumner, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Brett Thomas. How you doing today, buddy?
Doing fantastic. Excited for this topic today.
Yeah, man. We're just moving right along. Another episode for In the Shadow of the Rising Sun. This is part 2. And in the first part, in case you missed it, we did cover all the stuff leading up to the beginning of World War II, at least for the U.S. And our fight against the Japanese Empire in the Pacific. And there was a lot of stuff we went over. It went all the way back to even, before World War I, some of it. So it was pretty in-depth. We didn't get in too much into Pearl Harbor. We talked about it a little bit, but like we had said on that last episode, Pearl Harbor's been covered so many times, and it's been done so well, we figured we'd give you a little bit of it and kind of scoot along with the rest of the story, some of the stuff that usually gets left out. But it's important to realize, because as big of an impact that Pearl Harbor had on, the U.S. populace as a whole, right? The mentality of the nation going into World War II. It's not the only attack on December 7th. When the Japanese launched that attack, it's actually a multi-pronged, simultaneous attack across numerous places throughout the Pacific.
Planned and coordinated.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are some of the places we might be looking at?
Yeah, so like all across the Pacific region, north, south, central, everything. So you're talking like Midway, Guam, the Philippines, everything and anything.
Malaya.
Malaya. Because they're already in, from the last episode, we know all throughout China, French Indochina, like coming down and taking everything there, and then later we'll go up into even parts of Alaska. So like they're really covering the whole region, everything. They want every part of it. So
think about being, going from peace 1 minute to having all these things happening simultaneously.
Yeah, total chaos. And the president at the time, Roosevelt, gave his fireside chats. I'm sure everybody's familiar with. And
so for those that don't know, give a little rundown on what these fireside chats are.
Yeah, so the fireside chat, President Roosevelt would come out and speak to the nation, usually at that time over the radio. So you're talking the 1930s, all throughout the 30s and into the 40s. So when our nation was attacked and our installations and multiple places that were attacked on December 7th, he addressed the nation in one of these fireside chats.
Could you imagine nowadays if that happened, it'd be over Twitter?
Instantly.
It'd just be
instantly.
Twitter, like, hey, we're getting attacked here and here and here.
Yes, it would be everybody. We got eyes everywhere. But at that time, 2 days later after the carnage and devastation, you get the reports, after action reports from all across the Pacific region. He gave a fireside chat, and this is what he had to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, we are now in this war. We're all in it. Every single man, woman, and child is a partner in the most tremendous undertaking of our American history. We must share together the bad news and the good news. So far, the news has been all bad. we have suffered a serious setback in Hawaii. Our forces in the Philippines are taking punishment, but are defending themselves vigorously. The reports from Guam and Wake and Midway Islands are still confused, but we must be prepared for the announcement that all these 3 outposts have been seized.
Roosevelt's not too far off in his assumption that that he makes to the country, saying, we need to prepare for all of these places to be lost, because that's pretty much what happens. There's a lot more to the story than that. Guam, it's for a few reasons. One, we were a peacetime country, right? Mm-hmm. Even though we were kind of anticipating war and prepping in ways, there's a difference between a peacetime and a wartime economy, especially in America.
Oh yeah,
and how many troops you have and where to place them and what's strategically important. Before the show starts, in air quotes, it's hard to kind of tell. So, for instance, at Guam's only going to be defended by 550 sailors and Marines, and the Imperial Japanese force that is sent to invade Guam is going to be 5,900 strong. Now, that's not all ground troops. That's including everybody, sailors and all that stuff. But you look numbers to numbers, we're dealing with astronomical differences.
Greatly outmatched.
And truth be told, they're fighting, the Japanese, like the soldiers, at least for the Empire of Japan at this time, are experienced. They've been fighting a war up till this point in China.
Yeah, for a couple of years now.
And they've got some of their tactics really honed in, that speed, quick, just get in, overrun everything, take control, and that's that. But they have this MO that they usually like to bomb a place a few days before they launch. And so across the board, you're going to see this happen in Guam. You'll see this happen in the Philippines, but they're going to be subjected to, multiple days worth of bombardments. In Guam in particular, by the time the bombardments are over, the Japanese forces make landfall, and it's almost done, within the day.
Yeah, they sweep them.
And that's not to, to belittle the guys fighting there. They're putting up a fight, but for their small number, they're taking casualties. And they're way, way out there on their own. Guam is on the other side of the world. There's no one's coming to get them.
No reinforcements, no backup.
But this is one of the first times we start seeing, you hear about how the Japanese would treat prisoners of war, and you start seeing some of this early on, with some beheadings and this, that, and the other, and it just starts getting real nasty right off the bat. And in the Philippines, the Philippines is a little bit of a different scenario. We have more troops there. But, all that being said, in the end, it still falls. The difference being there's going to be 151,000 Americans and Filipino nationals that are going to be defending the Philippines. When the Japanese make landfall in the Philippines and start the process of trying to capture it, it does lead to 5 months worth of conflict. So it's not an over and done thing right off the rip.
Long time.
They're fighting back and forth, but eventually, by May of 1942, the Japanese are gonna take the Philippines, and the American and Filipino forces there are gonna have to surrender. And all in all, the casualties out of those 151,000 troops is going to be 25,000 killed, another 21,000 wounded, and then the rest will be subsequently captured, and many more will end up dying in the process of being a prisoner of war with the Japanese. You have the Bataan Death March that takes place over there. Yeah. You have again, living as a prisoner of war under the Japanese Empire is not a pleasant experience,
to say the least. So MacArthur was there with the Army, and he lasted about 4 months out of that 5 month total span, and he evacuated the island of Corregidor in March of 1942. 10 days later, he arrives in Australia, and he had this to say about it. Simply, he said, "I came through, and I shall return."
And eventually it does, but it takes a long time, doesn't it?
Yeah, like pretty much the whole war to get all the way back over there.
And we'll get into this in the future, but there's a multitude of reasons why But eventually we end up just bypassing. We end up bypassing the Philippines essentially on the road to Japan.
Yeah.
The way we go about getting there, it's more. Obviously we want to get our troops back that are still alive and all that stuff. But MacArthur going back isn't this glorious thing that he wants it to be, I think. And maybe we'll dive into like some of these generals and these characters from this era, because some of them are really interesting. And MacArthur is one of those guys. Like Pat and I have tremendous respect for. And I'm not saying I don't have respect for MacArthur, but Patton, he has his faults and he has his flaws, right? But that dude fights.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's not there. Like Patton's not there to gain political power or maybe some fame, but not in the same sense that MacArthur seems like he's almost a Hollywood general to me.
Makes sense.
Like he likes the glory, he likes the limelight, and he's a fighter, but he's not the same caliber fighter that Patton is. Even Dwight D. Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower reminds me a lot of Grant from the Civil War. He just grinds. He's just a constant grinding force. He's not flashy.
Yeah.
Like
humble.
Patton's flashy. He's not. Eisenhower's not flashy, but he just continues to grind until the job is done, right?
Yep.
And you can't stop him. Once that rock gets to rolling downhill, there's just no stopping him. And that's Eisenhower. But MacArthur, between what happens with him in World War II and then subsequently what happens in Korea, there's just a lot to unpack there. You know what I mean? It would be it'd be an interesting show. But needless to say, this gets us to probably the most, I would say, the most captivating story as far as American resistance in this initial phase of the war in the Pacific. This Japanese surge across the Pacific. And it happens at a small piece of coral 2,000 miles away from Pearl Harbor towards Japan. So 2,000 miles towards Japan at a place called Wake Island. And Wake Island is interesting because it's actually 3 islands, right? So the main island, Wake, but you also have 2 smaller islands that almost make it into like a U shape. It looks like a horseshoe. The other one of them is called Wilkes, and the other one is called Peel. Now, as we get into this, the majority of the ground fighting is going to take place on Wilkes and Wake Island.
Yeah.
But there will be things happening on all 3. But just so you understand the layout of Wake Island, there's 3. And I might end up mentioning Wilkes or Peel or something in this process. So just so you know, I'm still talking about the Wake Island fight. But Wake Island is one of those things that even before the war, long before the war, people in the U.S. government and U.S. military knew that we needed to be doing something to prepare Wake Island for war with Japan because it's a vital piece of rock. It's very strategically positioned smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I mean, I don't know if you can get much more in the middle of the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Japan, you know?
It's a good pit stop there.
And it's big enough to have an airfield on it. It's got this lagoon area in the middle that it's safe for like what are those, the seaplanes to land in.
Oh yeah.
So there's a lot of benefit to it, but unfortunately, because again, it wasn't a wartime environment for the country. It wasn't. It was peacetime. So funding and different rules and regulations really lead to Wake Island not being prepared. And when I say not being prepared, I'll kind of give you the rundown here. There's going to be less than 500 Marines on the island to defend it. You have the Marine Corps' 1st Defense Battalion. A detachment from that battalion is sent there to defend Wake Island, and they have some help. They have about 68 sailors and a few soldiers there helping as well. And part of the defense effort is going to be an air wing, VMF 211, and they're a fighter air wing. They fly the F-4F Wildcats. They'll be sent there as well. So there are some troops at Wake, but unfortunately, they don't have a finished runway. They don't have any kind of like early warning or early detection system put in place. They don't have any radar. So essentially, if they're waiting for the Japanese to come, they're gonna have to spot them by eye or spot them with with their aircraft. So on the morning of December 7th, when Commander Cunningham, who is the guy in charge of Wake Island, gets word of the attack at Pearl, he puts his guys stand to. He had already been sending VMF 211 up into the sky at dawn and dusk every day to kind of patrol and look for ships approaching or aircraft carriers or aircraft in the sky, like you name it. That's the only early warning system he had put in place that could actually stretch out, beyond eyesight from the island. And at this time, there's 4 aircraft from VMF 211 in the air, and they're patrolling. But it's terrible weather, right? It's terrible cloud coverage. You can't see anything, and it's super early in the morning still. So by the time the Japanese bombers that are making their way towards Wake Island, because again, that's their MO. They like to bomb for a few days and then launch a land attack.
Sure.
By the time these bombers make it to Wake Island and the Marines on the ground spot them, it's too late. They're already in their bombing runs.
Bombs away, man.
Yeah. And unfortunately, VMF 211, the patrol that's in the air, they're in a different area, right? They don't see these bombers coming in. So these guys, the guys on the ground are really on their own, and they get caught with their pants down. I mean, essentially. And these Japanese bombers come in and right off the rip, dude, they take out the most valuable weapon those Marines had. They hit the runway, and every single one of the Wildcats that are on the runway are destroyed. I think there's 8 on the runway, and within that first bombardment, they're all destroyed. So the only aircraft the Marines defending Wake Island have at this point now are the 4 that are in the air, right? Yeah. That's it. That's all they got. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of America Fog of War. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave us a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping us out and getting this show out to other people. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you give this video a like. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you stay up to date on all of our latest content. If you're looking for more of America Fog of War or just a way to help the show out, then please consider becoming a member over at our Patreon. For just $5 a month, you get early ad-free access to all of our content, as well as numerous other benefits, and it goes a long way in helping us maintain, honor, and uphold the legacy of the American warrior. Thank you so much, and as always, stay frosty. Now, the Marines on the island do have some defenses. They have some anti-aircraft weapons, and they have some 5-inch, I want to say 5-inch naval guns, right? Yeah. They have 5-inch naval guns and 3-inch anti-aircraft guns, as well as some 50 caliber machine guns that are capable of firing at both, seaborne vehicles and air vehicles as well. But again, they don't have a lot. I mean, they're really
sounds like a lot, but not really.
Yeah, I mean, but that's typical for the Marine Corps, right? Here's a little bit, make a lot happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you have enough guys to handle all those weapon systems.
At the end of this first day, things are looking pretty dark, but the Marines are pretty determined. They're not going to let something like that happen again. They moved their gun emplacements, changed positions so that the Japanese that flew over the first day aren't able to pinpoint those positions from that day and then hit those same positions early on the next day, because they have a feeling that there's going to be more of these. And they're right. There's going to be 2 follow-on days of bombardment. And the Marines have great success. Even the 4 aircraft from VMF 211 are just piecing up these Japanese bombers, right? So the way for those of you that kind of are new to combined arms warfare, I'll kind of explain, like we would say in the Marine Corps, Barney style, how it would play out. So if you have Wake Island and you have the Japanese bombers, and let's say they're 20 miles out from Wake Island heading there, the 4 aircraft from VMF 211 would come out and intercept those aircraft while they're en route to the island to make their bombing runs. The fighters, the American fighters, will continually try to take aircraft out of the sky, for, let's say, another 18 miles till they get within 2 miles of the island. Once that happens, the American aircraft would peel off, allowing the ground troops to be able to engage the aircraft with their anti-aircraft fire. And that's really simplified, but that's kind of how combined air warfare will work. You have to make. You're not going to have your own friendly planes flying around the sky while you're just shooting flak.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a great description.
That's not how it's going to play out. But that being said, over the course of these next 2 days, the Marines are able to take out quite a few of these bombers and have some success. Well, on the third day, the Japanese fleet that's going to make an amphibious assault on the island arrives. And there's going to be 450 essentially Japanese Marines. It's the equivalent of what our Marine Corps is, but in the Imperial Japanese Army are gonna be the ones that hit the beach and try to assault through the island. Unfortunately, though, they did not. They underestimated the resolve of the Marines on the island and their capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had mentioned before, they have these 5-inch naval guns, these coastal guns, that they're going to be able to engage these ships with. So as these ships are approaching, Commander Cunningham tells all of his Marines manning these guns, hold your fire until I tell you to open fire, right? So the Japanese fleet, this invasion task force is coming in, and as soon as they approach the island from the south. And to give you kind of an overview, Wake, like I had mentioned earlier, the 3 islands, it's a horseshoe. That horseshoe kind of points up. Like if you think about the U, the two ends of the U kind of point north almost. So Wake is the southern island, and then Wilkes is the northwestern island. Peel is the northeastern island. They approach from the side of Wake, and as they get within, I don't want to misspeak here, but it's something like, I want to say it's something like 2 miles of shore.
Yeah, something like 2 to 4.
They turn to their left, heading west, and they run parallel to Wake, and then kind of north towards Wilkes Island. They make like a run all the way up the edge of the 2 islands there, and they just start bombarding the everything. They bombard everything. I mean, they're hitting barracks. They're hitting what they think are gun emplacements. Raking this island with artillery from a naval ship, right? Which is big booms.
Take cover.
But the Marines don't return fire. And Commander Cunningham knows that his odds of success are going to be greater and greater if he can get those Japanese ships closer and closer to him before they realize where his guns are located. If he tries to engage them at a 2-mile distance, those Japanese ships are going to be able to pick those positions off one by one.
Oh, yeah.
So they wait. The Japanese make it all the way up to the northern end of Wilkes Island, flip a U-turn, and come right back. Now, this time they're getting closer because every time they turn, they're coming closer and closer to the island. And they do it all the way back down, right? So down to the bottom of the U. They get all the way back down there, still raking the island with fire. And finally, they make one more turn, and this gets them super close to the island. And when they make this final turn, as the fleet, as the last ship finishes this turn, Commander Cunningham gives the order to open fire, and it is chaos for the Japanese.
You may begin firing when your targets appear.
Exactly. Targets. Bam. So the lead ship in this Japanese task force is called the Yubari. It's a destroyer. It's the first one that's going to be engaged. And right off the rip, dude, it gets smoked with 2 just boom, boom, perfect shots. And things going up in smoke. It's damaged so bad that 2 other ships have to come in and escort it. They have to give a smoke screen and escort it out of the fight because the Japanese are worried about it sinking. It's the flagship. This is the one, I think the admiral that's in charge of the whole operation is on that ship, right? And it's getting ready to get sunk. But that's not the only ship. Further up the coast, back over on Wilkes Island, so you think northwestern side of that U shape, is going to be a ship called the Hayete. It's also a destroyer. And as it's approaching, it gets smoked with 2 rounds as well. And the interesting thing about the 5-inch guns that are firing on the Hayete is they don't have their sight system, right? They don't have like their elevation and windage sight system. So they're like free. They're like Kentucky windaging this thing, man. And when I mean Kentucky windage, like you think about using like a hunting rifle back in the day, just iron sights hunting rifle, and having to, like, if you wanted to shoot a certain distance, you have to hold so far above a target, right, to get the round to smoke it. And then they're doing that with artillery, basically, like these cannons, like the modern day cannons. Bananas. But they smoke this ship. They hit it so effectively that it blows up, splits in half, and sinks within, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate. The way they talk about it, it makes it sound like within seconds.
Yeah.
But most likely, probably within 2 minutes, this thing is under the water. From the time it gets hit to the time it's under the water. It's so fast, only one person from the Haiti's crew survives and is fished out of the water. One. Wow. And that's not the only time something like that's going to happen today. Another ship called the Kisaragi is also going to be struck by rounds and severely damaged. It's smoking as well when it turns to make its way back out to sea. So within a very short window of time, one ship has been sunk. It's the first Japanese destroyer to be sunk in the war, and not just our war. You know, the war the Japanese have already been fighting up to this point. The first one's been sunk, and it's been sunk bad.
Yes.
I mean, like one survivor, that's bad.
That's very bad.
2 more are severely damaged and might not make it back to where they launched from. And on top of that, the fight's not over, right? So the Japanese admiral, you know, he says, "Let's get out of here. We're not losing any more ships to this." Pulls off, starts sailing back to where they had launched from, and then VMF 211 and their 4 remaining Wildcats decide they want to get some of the action. And over the course of the next 5 hours, dude, this is what's crazy. 5 hours of this, they would fly out, find those ships, make nosedive bombing runs on them, drop their 2 100-pound bombs, expend all their machine gun ammunition, then fly back to Wake, land, rearm, refuel, take back off, and go bring the fight to them again. For 5 hours, they did this. Now, in this process, Captain Henry Elrod, who is one of the pilots flying one of these Wildcats in VMF 211, he will become he'll become a little bit of a legend. He will earn a Medal of Honor for his actions, for actions that takes place in what I'm getting ready to talk about, and in future actions on Wake Island. They kind of roll it all into one.
Okay.
But he becomes the first guy to sink an enemy ship with small caliber ordnance. So like 100-pound bomb from an aircraft, right? A fighter aircraft. Basically, he's the first one to nosedive a destroyer and sink it.
That's cool.
Which is really cool. It's really cool.
Set the standard.
That ship, the Kisaragi, the last one I talked about that had gotten damaged before pulling away from Wake Island, he nosedives on this thing, drops his 2 100-pound bombs, and it sinks within a matter of seconds, and nobody survives. So that's 2 ships. They've lost their entire crews just like that.
Wow.
He'll end up, I mentioned he'll end up getting the Medal of Honor for this and other actions in the Wake Island campaign. But what I think is even cooler, he lives on in Marine Corps history as a legend as Hammer and Hank Elrod.
Hammer and Hank.
Hammer and Hank is that's a cool name, man.
Just dropped a hammer on him.
He did, dude, and he doesn't let up.
Don't let him go. Don't let him go.
But needless to say, repulsing this invasion does a lot for American morale because, as you had mentioned, or as we had heard at the beginning of the show, things are very uncertain. Roosevelt's telling the country, hey, we have to prepare for losing all of these things. And then you have this glimmer of hope. Like the Japanese aren't unstoppable, right? And America's not going to be as easy to fight as you thought it was going to be.
Right.
And it goes nuts back in America, right?
Yeah, as soon as it hits the papers, the headlines.
There's a little bit of help. And a reporter, we have a documentary a short documentary we put out on Wake. So if you want a more in-depth telling of this story, look at our YouTube page. You'll find part 1 of this documentary. It talks all about all of this, and it'll give you a little bit more of the details. But there's something called cryptographic padding, and it was used in radio transmissions. And kind of the way that I gather they would use it is they would use nonsensical phrases and then tie in what they actually wanted to say, and then use another nonsensical phrase so that it doesn't make any sense to a listening ear, right?
Mm.
But if you had the code books or whatever, you'd be able to tell what they were asking for. So somehow in this cryptographic padding, this message comes through, and this reporter gets word of this message back at Pearl Harbor, and he can't believe it. He's like, I can't believe this is what the Marines are on Wake Island are saying after this, right? Like this is nuts. I have to take this to the public. But unbeknownst to him, he was reporting on the cryptographic padding. So it's not really what the commander was saying back. Commander Cunningham was saying back on Wake Island. It was just the padding he was using. But still, a legend was born, and America took it and ran with it. But the term was, when asked what they needed, what the guys on Wake Island needed, the response was, send more Japs.
Yeah, that's
which
amazing.
is so gangster.
Yeah.
It's so gangster.
They repelled the assault. They repelled a naval assault.
It just makes them sound like bloodlusty. Like send us more. We like that wasn't enough.
Always
we need
ready.
it. We need. It just sounds so. It sounds so cool. Now, unfortunately, the story doesn't end there for our Wake Island guys. The admiral for the Japanese task force goes back to his base. He bulks up. And he also is going to bring in some aircraft carriers that are on their way back from the attack at Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. He's going to swallow them up into his task force as well, 2 to be exact. And he's going to bulk up the invasion force. I want to say that, it goes from 450 now. It goes up to 1,500. And again, guys on the ground, the Marines on the ground have been taking casualties. So that 450 or so, roughly that number of troops they had, that's dwindling. Mm-hmm. So the odds are not fairly stacked in the Marines' favors. But needless to say, bombardments continue. VMF 211's planes are starting to, some are being shot down out of the 4 they have remaining. Some are being shot down. Some are just essentially breaking apart, due to normal wear and tear, and they don't have the parts to fix the planes, right? So planes are becoming unserviceable, and they're down to just, I want to say they get down to just 2 aircraft by this time. Now,
I think hey might be a better idea to start. Hey, thanks for watching our show. If you're looking to get more out of America... Here we go. Hey, thanks for tuning in to America Fog of... Hey, thanks for watching our show. If you're looking to get more out of America Fog of War, or if you're trying to get more of America Fog of War, or are looking... Hey, thanks for tuning into our show. If you are looking to get more from America Fog of War, or are looking for a way to help us, or you're just looking to help... No, just. Recut. If you're trying to get... If you want more content from America Fog of War, or you're looking for a way to support the show, consider becoming a Patreon. Wait, a Patreon? It's a patron. Instead of consider becoming a Patreon, consider joining our Patreon. Okay. For just $5 a month, you can submit questions to be answered on air. Log into a monthly Zoom call with either Colby or myself to discuss related topics, to discuss U.S. military history or any topic related to it, and gain early ad-free access to all of our content. And gain early ad-free content to all of our content. And gain early ad-free content to all of our access content. And gain redo. Visit patreon.com/America Fog of War or click the link in our description and help us to maintain the legacy to help us honor the legacy of the American warrior. Hey, I'm not that good at this. If you like the show, join the Patreon for $5 a month. Thank you.
I want to take a minute and talk about the relief. There's a relief effort, and there's a lot of controversy around this relief effort. Then and now, there's a lot of arguments back and forth, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on this matter at all. So I'm going to give you a very bird's eye view, Barney-style explanation of what's happening with this relief effort. Shortly after Pearl Harbor and the attack then at the first attack at Wake Island, they start the U.S. Navy starts organizing a relief to get these troops either reinforced or off of Wake Island, right? And that's going to consist of 3 U.S. aircraft carrier fleets, right? So 3 of them, separate fleets, are going to be part of this. And the game plan is one of the fleets is supposed to sail towards the Solomon Islands to kind of pull the Japanese Navy that direction, while the other 2 fleets sail in and get the guys off of Wake or reinforce them. The problem is we are in the aftermath of the attack at Pearl Harbor, and the Pacific Fleet has been decimated, and we can't afford to lose the only commodity we have as far as fighting naval warfare in the Pacific right now are aircraft carriers. That's all we have, and it's still super early in the war. They don't know yet how dominant aircraft carriers are going to be. They're still thinking destroyers are the dominant thing on the battlefield as far as naval warfare goes.
Yeah, they're untested at this time still.
So in the forethought of everybody's mind is, yeah, we want to, at least the commander elements, right? The higher echelon. Their main priority, as much as I would like to say, is getting these guys off of Wake Island. It's not. It's protecting what they have. They cannot lose what they have. And unfortunately, that really takes away from the probability that these Marines are going to get rescued. And on the 22nd, so on December 22nd, one of these seaplanes makes it to Wake Island. It had come from Pearl Harbor, and it brought great news. There's a relief effort coming. They're this many days away. Get everybody ready to be evacuated. All the civilians will be evacuated, this, that, and the other. You guys are going to be good. So there's like this ray of hope. And then that airplane takes off later that day. And as soon as it takes off, another bombing run comes in. But this time, instead of being from like dual prop bombers that take off from an island and fly long distances, these are from single prop fighter bombers, which can only come from one thing.
Yep.
An aircraft carrier, which means there's an aircraft carrier in the Japanese aircraft carrier in the area. Yep. And as soon as that word makes it back to the relief effort, who are close enough to intervene at this point, they're within the distance to be able to intervene and save the island. As soon as that word gets back that there's a Japanese aircraft carrier in the area, they cancel the relief effort and the Marines are left on their own.
That's so tough, man.
It is tough. And like I did a lot of reading about it because it's an area that I'm not super familiar with. Most people are familiar with the big stuff, right? Like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, at least as far as the Pacific goes. These little things I don't know as much about. So I found it fascinating. I did a lot of reading on it. I mean, there was almost mutiny on one of the ships. Like the sailors and the lower echelon like officers were like, dude, what are we doing?
Oh, they didn't want to turn around.
No, they were pissed about it.
Keep going, yeah.
And not to mention the rest of the 1st Marine Defense Battalion is on those ships. So it's their buddies that are on the island, Oh. And I mean, one of the aircraft carrier fleet commanders almost ignored the order and just kept going. Like there's a lot that's playing into it, but ultimately one of the things that stood out to me is the guy that made the decision was already going to be fired because of Pearl Harbor. He wasn't the guy that pulled his rank off his collar at Pearl Harbor, but his head was getting ready to hit the chopping block too. And he didn't want to make any more mistakes that jeopardized the future of the Navy and the U.S. war effort in the Pacific. And so he made this decision.
There's a lot of variables.
Dude, there's a lot of variables, and we can Monday morning quarterback it all day. But they did just lose like the muscle of the Pacific Fleet, and the carriers are all they have left.
Yeah.
So like you're weighing what is more important to the cause, right? I feel for the guy.
Tough.
I feel for the guy that had to make that decision because he lived with that the rest of his life too.
Sure he did.
But needless to say, the Marines are on their own, right? No one's coming, and they start to realize that. When they see those single prop planes coming in to make a bombing run, they're like, all right, well, I guess that's
Where's
it.
ours?
Yeah, like they're not coming.
It was supposed to be here already.
So on December 23rd, in the early morning hours, it's still dark outside. that Japanese task force makes it, and they launch their assault. And it's nighttime, right? So the Marines can't see. Again, they don't have radar system, and they hear the Japanese boats. And I will go into a little bit of detail on this, but it's not going to be super in depth. Again, check for these short docs if you want like a really in depth look at this. But essentially, the Japanese forces are going to make multiple landings across Wake Island and Wilkes Island, and they land successfully because, again, you can't see anything. There's no illumination. Eventually, Commander Cunningham gives authorization to shoot a flare into the air, and it illuminates enough that they can see these landing crafts, and gunfire erupts. Things are going crazy. On Wilkes Island, the Japanese are able to overrun a 3-inch gun position and push the Marines off of this gun position, and kind of get a little bit of a hold on some land. But they do that to their detriment, because later on, and this is one of those things about battle and combat, how much luck plays a role into a lot of things, right?
I agree.
You have to be prepared physically and mentally. You have to be able to shoot your weapon. You have to be able to do all these. It's not all luck, but there is a lot of luck. There's going to be a young Marine officer, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head here, and I don't have it in my notes, but he is going to organize a group of Marines to go take the fight to the enemy on Wilkes. And as soon as they launch their attack from the western side of this Japanese force that has made it onto Wilkes Island and have taken over this 3-inch gun emplacement. As soon as they launch their attack, simultaneously from the other side, the eastern side of this Japanese force, 2 other Marines start engaging those Japanese and catch them at a pincer, right? A full double envelopment. And the Japanese are freaked out by this. They're like, they don't know which way the enemy's coming from. They get overran. They have to pull back, and the Marines take back those guns. And
nice.
On Wake, a lot of the same stuff is going on. Japanese forces, though, are making it onto the island more and more and more. And really what it boils down to is the equipment that they had. So normally you would have a few different ways of comms, like communication. You'd have radios, you'd have wire communications, like you see in those old World War II movies, the crank phone. That's wire communication. Now, wire communication is great because it doesn't rely on a signal, but it's super susceptible to indirect fire, being cut by an enemy. There's all these kind of things that if that wire is cut, comms is gone. And this is really what plays into the loss of Wake Island, is losing comms. So as the fighting is going on, this is all happening in the dark. Commander Cunningham is losing comms with all of his different stations of Marines around the island. And he's starting to see Japanese flags pop up in different places. And as the sun comes up, all he sees are these Japanese flags. And so he thinks, all right, well, I only have this many guys left. I can't get in touch with any of these other guys. It's time to surrender, Yeah. And in all fairness, the Japanese did have a stronghold on Wake Island, the big island.
Well, he may have also thought that they were annihilated over there too, so maybe save what you have left.
Well, that is
seeing what you're saying.
It's the idea of, do we all die, Alamo style, or do we live and see how the war plays out? Is this island worth the lives of all these guys? Now, they don't know what being a Japanese prisoner of war is going to be like either at this time. But needless to say, Commander Cunningham surrenders the island. And as they're going around to all these different pockets of Marines, he starts to see that Wilkes Island had been recaptured by the Marines. It was under the Marines' control. A lot of places on Wake, same story, right? A lot of the guys were didn't want to surrender.
Wow.
They had recaptured their positions and were willing to fight.
Counteroffensive.
Now, VMF 211, this is a very, them dudes, they're special. They're pilots, they're not ground troops. But as soon as their aircraft are all destroyed, and they're all destroyed the day before, the last two aircraft, one is last seen chasing a Japanese fighter with another one on his tail over the horizon, never seen again. Jeez. And the other one is damaged so bad he had to crash land it back on the runway, and it's out of action. So now all of their aircraft are gone. And before this fighting starts, they showed up to man one of the defensive positions as riflemen.
Nice.
In one of the worst areas in the attack as well. And by the time the fighting is over, every single one of them had been wounded or killed, including Hammer and Hank, who will be awarded his Medal of Honor posthumously.
That's an insane casualty rate, man. 100%.
So it's a sad day. Now, the remaining U.S. troops that are on the island that do end up surrendering will be prisoners of war the remainder of the war. What's messed up is there's a large group of civilians on Wake Island. I say a large group. I don't want to misquote here, but I think it's like 150 or 200 civilians that are on Wake Island. Mm. And that could be way off, so I apologize if I'm way off. But needless to say, these civilians will be kept on the island as slave labor for the remainder of the war, because the Japanese turned this into an airstrip for them. You know, they use it as an airstrip. And at the end of the war, or towards later in the war, I'm not necessarily at the end of the war, but later in the war, the U.S. makes a bombing run on the island, and that Japanese commander thinks that they're getting ready to assault the island and try to take it over. And so he has all the civilians beheaded.
Dude, that's insane, man.
He killed them all. And he ends up being tried for that as a war criminal and executed after the war. But it's just what a terrible way to go.
Yeah. What a terrible way to go so early in the war like that, and just drug out throughout the rest of the war.
So let's just recap real quick. The Japanese, by May of 1942, have taken the Philippines. They've taken Guam, Malaya, Wake Island. They tried to take Midway Island once successfully. Yeah. They've attacked Pearl Harbor. They're winning nonstop. So the U.S. needs a win.
Yeah, and a win, they need everything. But the question is, where do you start? Because there's so many places to go.
Where do you start? And how, you want something to get back at them kind of the way they got back. You want to strike at the heart, right? They hit American soil. You want to get back. How do you do that?
Well, President Roosevelt came up, by the end of Wake and everything there, he said, we need to bomb Tokyo, Japan. We need to hit them right where it counts, just like you said. And these guys, so they got to come up with a plan, but it's top secret. And the guy coming up with this plan, who's going to present this to the president and other top military officials, is Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. Now, his qualifications go back 25 years for him to be at this point. And I got to cover this for a little bit just to let you know how and why he's leading this.
He's a bad man.
Yeah, this attempt to get back at Japan there so early. So, born December 14th, 1896, he enlists in the Signal Corps Reserve as a flying cadet in 1917. He's commissioned as an officer by 1918. He receives his doctorate degree from MIT in 1925. And by 1928, he's developing something to fly, like for the blind, I guess, on instruments, if you're unable to see. So he completes the first flight ever on instruments, years before World War II. So, and that's going to play a big role later on.
Which is crazy to think about with the technology they had at the time. I mean, even now it's crazy to think about flying without seeing. You're just using the instruments on the on the dashboard of the plane.
Yeah.
But back then, it's even crazier back then to me, man. I mean, those guys are using things that the farming equipment is more advanced now than their aircraft was back then. That's true. It's just nuts.
Well, he does all these things. He has a career in the service, and by 1930, he resigns from the Army. He works in the Shell Oil Company. And then at his own request in 1940, when things are heating up and everything, he gets back into the service there in July of 1940. Now, that's not all of his qualifications, but just to say a few for the sake of time, he's very qualified. So he comes up with this plan, and I'm sure it just sounds absolutely crazy because it was crazy. And he tells the president and these guys that I'm going to get some volunteers. I'm going to take some some bombers, and I'm going to fly them off of flight decks. Medium bombers that are a little bit smaller than the large heavy bombers, and yeah, we're gonna bomb Japan. But by the way, it's going to be a one-way mission, and we're going to fly into after Japan. We're going to cross the little bit of ocean there and fly into China, and hopefully land.
It's a one-way mission. That's just nuts to me, dude.
Yeah, one way, and we're going to hope to land in territory not occupied by the Imperial Japanese.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Very crazy story.
Well, what makes it more crazy, I would imagine, is when the guys are getting recruited for this, they can't know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they can't know. So, I mean, when they were looking for people, once this plan was approved, okay, they're looking for their volunteers. They ask all these different airmen, and they're told that you have the opportunity to volunteer for a extremely hazardous but unspecified mission that's going to require a high degree of skill and would be of great value to our defense effort. So that's really
that's all you get fed there.
That's the sales pitch.
All right, sign me up.
and right, there was not any lack of volunteers. There were,
Well, another thing too, people are freaking hot right now. It's everything is fresh. And Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, all the things we've been talking about, this is all fresh. So it's understandable why they would have numerous volunteers. But let's get into the training for these guys, because what they're getting ready to do is bonkers to me. So in early March of 1942, they show up for their training, and they do this down at Fort Eglin. Eglin Airfield down in Florida. They're going to train for cross-country flying, night flying. They're going to train in navigation and using instruments, using instruments only, as well as low-altitude approaches to bombing targets, rapid bombing, and evasive actions. The crews would practice. Now, this is where things get really crazy to me. Traditionally, a B-25, this is the aircraft that they're going to be using, requires 1,200 feet to take off. It needs 1,200 feet of runway to be able to get into the air. These guys are training to take it off of an aircraft carrier that gives them 450 feet of runway. So it's less than half the runway.
Yeah, that's just insane.
Which is so crazy. That is so insane to me. These are big, big planes. For an aircraft carrier, they're huge.
I mean, absolutely. I'm sure when you volunteer, your resume's got to look pretty good too. But
you got to be a capable pilot, and so to train for that, they would mark out the distance or close as they could on the runways at Eglin for 450 feet, and you see it in the movie Pearl Harbor. They got to take off before they hit that line. That's all very accurate.
And so for the B-25 Mitchell to accommodate this mission, it had to be modified, and the modifications were numerous, and mostly what it comes down to is the planes are going to be stripped to save as much weight as possible so they can add fuel tanks.
And they're going to be really stripped.
Yeah, they strip everything and anything out of it. They add fuel cells to the wings, the bomb bay, and the fuselage. So the Mitchell had standard 646 gallons, but with these additional fuel cells, it bumps it up to 1,141 U.S. gallons. Now, the weapon systems, like the machine guns and everything, the barrels had to be removed and replaced with broomsticks and painted black to make it look like barrels, just to save weight. Now, the Norden bomb site, it's a pretty cool bomb site. If you ever looked into it, it really was.
Well, it's legendary. It's legendary in World War II. We're the only country that had it, and that's what made us so effective.
Yeah, and it really, the bombardier, what's cool about it is it's autopilot. When you're over their targets, the bombardier flips a switch and he takes control of the plane, makes it run straight, and hits the target, releases the switch, and it goes back to the pilots. Well, that's gone, and what it's replaced with is this thing called a Mark Twain sight, and it basically it looks like a protractor, like
compass and protractor.
Yeah, like you have to do something. I don't know how it works, but it's nothing crazy like that.
Hey guys, just wanted to take a quick second to let you know a little bit more about America Fog of War and what we're trying to do with this channel. See, Brett and I both are Marine Corps combat veterans from the global war on terror. We fought in both Iraq and Afghanistan. We've also had an intense interest in the history of the American warrior. Now, it would be a lie to say that our opinions aren't somewhat biased, but after all of the study, the research, and things that we've seen with our own eyes, we are both confident that the greatest warrior the world has ever known is the American warrior. Whether we're talking about the American patriots that gained our independence from Great Britain, the blue-clad federal troops that won a victory at Gettysburg, or the Marines that raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, all of them have distinguished themselves far and above what's normally expected of a nation's warrior class. Citizen soldiers that have been willing to sacrifice all upon the altar of freedom. And today, that legacy seems somewhat threatened. It is our goal here to continue telling their stories, to uphold their legacy so that they're never forgotten, and that future generations of American warriors have ideals and standards to strive to reach. Thank you for your support, and as always, stay frosty.
And then the last thing they had, of course, was two of the bombers had cameras mounted in the tail of the plane to record what
you
they
got to
were going
record it,
do.
man.
Yeah.
Did it happen if you didn't record it?
Yeah. You got to be able to see what's going on there. With the extensive training and modifications out of the way, finally selected overall, it's 80 brave men are going to conduct this mission. And this mission is the first ever joint mission between the Army, Air Forces, and the Navy in World War II.
I mean, that's crazy too. You know, these are, it's just mind-blowing to me that they're taking these big freaking bombers off of aircraft carriers.
Yeah, it is something absolutely insane. Like one wing is going to be hanging over the flight deck, like over the ocean, and then the other wing clears the tower by like something crazy like 4 inches.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's really, really nuts. So, and it was approved. But anyway, so at a secret conference in San Francisco, Jimmy Doolittle meets up with Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey, and they discuss what they're going to be doing. And so they agree upon 400 miles due east of Japan. Halsey's going to bring Doolittle and his men right to the doorsteps of the Empire of Japan. They will launch planes. However, if discovered, Halsey said it's going to be, launch planes immediately, and then I got to get out of there.
Yeah.
So that's the deal, and they go with it. So by April 1st, 16 modified B-25s are loaded up onto the USS Hornet, and they set sail from Alameda, California, where Jimmy Doolittle was born. They're going to set sail, and they're going to link up with the USS Enterprise, forming part of Halsey's Task Force 16. So these guys have a little bit of ground to cover. Now, meanwhile, that this is happening, of course, like anything, we're doing it too. So the Japanese are listening to our radio chatter, and they're trying to decipher the plans and what we're talking about, what we're doing. And that's kind of the only advantage they have at the time, but they didn't have radar. They lacked radar, but to make up for that, they employed these patrol boats, and this is going to go across a very vast Pacific region, and they're basically fishing boats equipped with radios, and that's their early warning detection. Yeah. So they're going to encounter Task Force 16. They're going to encounter a lot of these. Now, they're getting into crazy waters here by April 18th. So April 18th is the day of the attack, of the raid, I should say.
They're deep into enemy territory.
Deep, and they're on the other side of the Pacific at this point. And what happens is, by the cover of darkness, anytime they see one of these patrol boats on the radar screen, they're just going to change course and continue to set, a new course, continue on to Japan as time goes on. However, by 7:38 in the morning, the sun's up, and one of these little patrol boats is spotted. And it's actually, this sounds crazy to me, but it's spotted 20,000 yards from the USS Hornet, which is equivalent to 11 miles.
Yeah. So that's a long ways, but you think the ocean's so flat, dude, something stands out.
Yeah.
Stuff stands out on the ocean.
So the USS Nashville immediately fires upon this ship and sinks it, but the Hornet's radio room picked up an outgoing transmission. So
The gig is up.
The gig's up. They weren't able to smash them in time, but
It's go time, gentlemen.
yeah. And the reason why it's becoming so urgent now is because Halsey's task force, it's only half of his task force. So in the event, being so far into enemy territory, if they run into a Japanese naval and air force, they could be greatly outmatched in comparison to what they've seen before. So, yeah, it's time. So the plan was to go for 400 miles. They're gonna turn into the wind and launch at about 650 miles out from Japan. So Halsey gives the order to the Hornet. He says, "Launch planes to Colonel Doolittle and Gallant Command. Good luck and God bless you."
And the raid is on.
And the raid's on. So the guys, they come out. They're coming out 10 hours ahead of time and over 200 miles further than expected.
Yikes.
So to say the least, they board their planes. They turn into the wind, and leading from the front is none other than Jimmy Doolittle himself, and as crew number one pilot. And he takes to the sky, launches this thing into the air.
And the Doolittle raid begins.
Yeah,
so
it's incredible. It's really incredible footage. But lastly here, despite heavy seas, it took just over an hour for all 16 of them to launch, and all 16 launched without incident.
because you have the footage, the real footage of the one coming off the end of the aircraft carrier and dipping below the lip of the aircraft carrier. It looks like it's going to go in the water, and then it just picks right back up.
Yeah,
it is crazy to watch, man.
But they all made it successfully.
And just so everybody knows, they're going after multiple targets. These are going to be munitions factories, barracks, things like that. But there's 10 targets in Tokyo. There's 2 in Yokohama, and then there's 1 each in Yokosuka, Nagoya. I apologize, Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka. Now the flight is kind of proceeding as planned. And things are going all right. They launched. Doolittle's group's approaching Tokyo from the north. The Raiders are going to fly as low as the terrain is going to permit them to fly. How high above the water were they flying?
Oh, like 200 yards, single file, just
crazy,
just low as they can, just way.
So I would imagine they're keeping probably that same altitude coming over the land as best they can.
Yeah, probably just as little over treetop as possible.
Now, this is interesting. Roughly 10 miles north of Tokyo, the group is going to spot 9 Japanese fighters. Now, you've already mentioned that all the guns on the plane have been replaced with broomsticks that have been painted black. So if those fighters decide to turn and intercept these B-25s, they're done for.
Oh, 9
There's
fighters.
no way they have nothing they can fight back with.
That would be it.
For whatever reason, those Japanese fighters don't do anything. I don't know if they don't see them or what, but they don't engage. They just let them on. They let them go. So, the Raiders began to climb as they got nearer to the targets to a bombing altitude of 1,200 feet. They got over their targets, dropped their bombs, and then dipped back down to tree level and flew west over the outskirts of the city and on their way.
Awesome.
I mean, you think about, they say in the movie it's a pinprick in the heart of Japan. Dude, just Tokyo. They bombed Tokyo.
Yeah.
And they did it in a gangster fashion.
Gangsters, right?
I mean, let's take bombers off of aircraft carriers. It normally needs 1,200 feet. I only need 450 feet.
Yep.
Like, that's insane to me, dude.
They probably thought they were protected at that distance at that time.
There's an estimated 14 tons of bombs dropped on Japanese targets in this raid. Air crews are going to claim hits on virtually all of the assigned targets that they were given.
Nice.
It's just incredible. But anyways, the 16 B-25s are on their way to the China mainland.
Wow. So they basically did this untouched, like total surprise, unscathed, made a move, and it worked.
Hooking and jabbing, man. Hooking and jabbing.
So yeah, heading towards the China coast, as the plan had specified it, they're going to land in hopefully friendly territory once reaching bases in China. However, the weather took a terrible change. It is like this horrendous thunderstorm that comes out of nowhere. They had clear skies over Japan, but coming over into China, it takes a turn for the worse. So they reach the coast. They're gaining altitude as high as they possibly can, and about 6,000 to 9,000 feet up in the air, and they're running out of fuel. Fuel gauges coming empty, all sorts of. It's starting to get pretty.
Things are looking serious.
Terribly serious. Now, Doolittle's going to attempt to reach Chuchao, this base there, by radio. It doesn't get any response, nothing, and that's kind of where he's headed. Now, his co-pilot, they're making the decision to bail out. Jimmy Doolittle, they're out of fuel, everything, and his co-pilot, Dick Cole, he's a 25-year-old officer, and while Doolittle mans the controls, this guy is going to jump out. He's going to bail out. And this is what he said later about it, was, our only course of action was to climb up to what we thought was a safe altitude and fly until we ran out of fuel, then bailed out. Well, after the whole crew bails out, the crew of 5, Jimmy Doolittle bails out himself. And he looks at the clock on the instrument panel, and it was 9:20 p.m. It was exactly 13 hours since he had taken off prior from the Hornet. 15 crews had crash landed or bailed out in the occupied China, and one crew number 8, they had suffered some mechanical issues and knew they couldn't make it to the coastline by their calculations. And mind you, they're flying on instruments because of this storm in the dark. And they kind of divert to the Soviet Union. Now, they hope to, when they get to the Soviet Union, they hope to refuel there. Like they were kind of get a free ticket to ride, refuel, and then make their way onward into China. But that wasn't the case. The Soviet Unions, they interred them for 13 months because they had some type of an agreement with Japan. And they don't want to be caught up with like harboring United States pilots to just bomb Tokyo. So they were like, we got to keep this hush hush. You got to stay here for a little while. So they weren't POWs, but they weren't free to go.
Yeah.
And they stayed there for a long time. And that was, there. So, but the 5-man crew, they eventually did escape. I say escape with these quotes marks there, into Persia, and they returned home by May of 1943. Now, the immediate results of Tokyo's bombing. Now, the Japanese capital obviously is enormous. It's Admiral Yamato Isoroku's fear of a U.S. carrier strike. He had basically told his people everything, that this was unreasonable, this could not happen, there's nothing to worry about. Well, it happened completely unimpeded. American planes flying over there. Just 4 months and 11 days from Pearl Harbor and all the other attacks across the Pacific region, American airmen bombed Tokyo, and this provided a very important boost in American morale in the early months of World War II, after not having much to go off of other than, Wake, but things that had eventually gone south there.
You think about it this way: Wake was like the jab to set up the right cross. Of the Doolittle raid. You know?
This was not as big as like other things that are going to happen, but like anything, like you said, the pinpoint in the heart of Japan, like it did its job, and really, I could only imagine what crippling effect it had in Japan on their people and their trust in their government, but also not only just in Japan, but like talk about across Europe, because this, by this time, Germany and Italy had already declared war upon the United States back in December. So now this strike in Tokyo, the rest of the Axis powers must also kind of be thinking like, whoa, where else could this happen?
For real.
And so, the Japanese were super frustrated, to say the least, that they couldn't get at they couldn't get our carriers. They couldn't find a task force that launched the planes. They couldn't knock the planes out of the sky. All they could do was capture some of our guys that they were able to capture in China and torture and kill some of them. But these guys, they really, in something that's never happened before, they made it happen. It was incredible.
How many of the original airmen make it back to the United States?
Yeah, good question there. So 2 days later, on April 20th, Doolittle's crew, they're escorted by local Chinese, and they reach the embassy in Chongqing. And he's going to wire back. Well, they got 4 additional crews with them. And he wires back and gives a report to General Henry Hap Arnold. And he says, Quote, Tokyo successfully bombed. Due to bad weather on the China coast, believe all airplanes wrecked. 5 crews found safe in China so far. That's the only word that they had. Now, ultimately, 73 of the 80 men are going to survive the raid. 3 of them were killed in action, bailing out or crashing in China, and the other 8 became POWs. And of those 8 POWs, 4 of them were executed by the Japanese. So another horrendous continuation of everything that's been going on,
but
in that area.
Needless to say, the mission was a success. I mean,
Yes.
you think about this in the grand scheme of things. It's not as pivotal. It's not as destructive as the attack at Pearl Harbor. But dude, what a bit of psychological warfare that is. You know what I mean? You can touch it. We'll reach out and touch you back. You know, and we'll actually get on your homeland, like your capital. We're gonna smoke it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Hawaii is obviously that's American. That's American soil, but it would be the equivalent of. It would have been like the Japanese bombing Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But there's a lot more exciting stuff to come, man. We're going to be looking at the Battle of Midway, the Battle of Coral Sea, which we're excited about because we don't really ever cover naval things on here. At least we haven't up to this point that extensively. And those 2 battles are the biggest in our history. So I'm very excited about that. And then we're going to be looking at my like meat and potatoes of World War II, the first major ground fighting between the U.S. and Japanese forces at Guadalcanal and in the Guadalcanal campaign. And that will include all the little nooks and crannies, too. We're going to be looking at the Marine Corps Raiders. We're going to be looking at John Basilone and his Medal of Honor story. There's a ton of stuff that we're going to be able to cover. So very excited about that. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please make sure you subscribe to the show and leave us a 5-star review. It does a ton. It helps us out so much. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Make sure you like the video and hit that little notification bell. That also ensures that you get future episodes from us, and it helps us out a lot as well. And lastly, if you're looking to support the show a little bit more, consider coming over and becoming a Patreon at our Patreon account. It's $5 a month. We give early access to all of our shows, early access to things like our short documentaries that we're working on, super early to those, and you get a say in what we cover in the future. There are more benefits that we're working up now to get out to our patrons that we'll start introducing in the future, but it's $5 a month. If you like supporting the show and want to do what you can to help out, it really helps out a lot. If that's something you can't do or you're not interested in, please continue to watch for free or listen for free. We love making this content for you guys. But other than that, man, it's been a good time.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
All right. Well, until next time, everybody, stay frosty.